Thank you. Well, the challenge that I want to discuss today is one of growing importance to our nation and the world. It's a challenge America, quite frankly, cannot afford to ignore, trivialize, or to misinterpret in the years ahead. And partly because our current president, has ignored, trivialized, and misinterpreted as a form of habit over the last 6 years. That challenge is Vladimir Putin and his escalating aggression and his attempts to undermine America's interests and those of our allies. In 2008, with its invasion of Georgia, Russia sent a clear warning to the world of its rising ambitions. But instead of heeding this warning, less than a year later, President Obama and Hillary Clinton initiated what they termed a reset with Russia, which included dangerous concessions to Putin on arms control and on missile defense. President Obama then went on to devastate the United States military in terms of funding cuts, while Russia was undergoing its largest military buildup since the Cold War. Russia's leaders have increased defense spending more than 20-fold since this century began, and they've even violated arms control agreements in the process. It should be a shock to no one that these investments were not for the purpose of keeping peace or spreading democracy or improving the lives of the Russian people. They were for the purpose of reclaiming Russia's global status and redrawing the maps of Europe. Putin began this in earnest with his annexation of Crimea and the invasion of Ukraine that happened last year. The U.S. and the international response to this act of war was, and continues to be, reactive, allowing Putin to set the agenda instead of being proactive and preemptive. It has been far too incremental and timid to affect Putin's overall objectives. And its outward aggression has increased, Moscow's aggression towards its own people have increased in kind. Putin's authoritarian regime has imprisoned dissidents, murdered an opposition leader in full view of the Kremlin, and waged a propaganda war to manipulate the Russian people, all of which has largely been ignored by Washington. In the face of all of this evidence, Hillary Clinton continues to tout her reset with Russia as one of her greatest foreign policy achievements. But if the reset worked, it worked for Russia, not for the United States. Russia's actions in recent years are intended to be the prologue to a longer and darker story. Vladimir Putin hopes to reemerge as a rival to America's military might in this century. He will invade sovereign nations, undermine our global objectives, and solidify rival coalitions to achieve his aims. We are barreling towards a second Cold War, and strong American leadership is the only force capable of ensuring that peace and security once again prevail. The more our current president fails to test his leadership against Putin, the more important it becomes for our next president to pass it. And I will pass that test if I am given that opportunity. Over the last 5 years, I have consistently spoken out on the need to contain Russian aggression, even when it wasn't popular to do so. I have highlighted the dangers of the Obama-Clinton reset with Russia, and in 2014, I urged a rapid and forceful response to Putin's annexation of Crimea. As soon as I take office, I will move quickly to increase pressure on Moscow. I will impose a new round of sanctions on the Kremlin senior leadership and other Russian entities, including Gazprom, and will work with Europe to exclude Russia from the SWIFT interbank payment system. I will immediately provide Ukraine with lethal military assistance and increased intelligence sharing to ensure that Putin's violation of Ukraine's sovereignty will come at a high price. I will impose visa bans and asset freezes against high-level Russian officials and move to isolate Russia diplomatically by ceasing efforts to engage Moscow on issues not essential to resolving the crisis in Ukraine. Under my administration, there will be no pleading for meetings with Vladimir Putin. He will be treated for what he is, a gangster and a thug. And I stand by that phrase. In his recent 60 Minutes interview, Vladimir Putin was asked directly about me labeling him a gangster. And his response was more telling than he intended it to be. He said, quote, "How can I be a gangster if I work for the KGB?" End quote. Well, Mr. Putin, I rest my case. He and his fellow former KGB agents have transformed Russia's once fledgling economy and democracy into a criminal enterprise. There's no aspect of Russia's economy or society that is untouched by Mr. Putin's corruption. When I'm president, America will speak clearly about Vladimir Putin. He and his cronies will be the target of U.S. financial pressure. We will seek out his overseas accounts and his ill-gotten wealth, and help the Ukrainians and eventually the Russian people to recover those stolen assets. Furthermore, I will conduct my broader foreign policy in a way that sends a message to the world that the United States isn't ceding leadership to an emboldened Putin. I will counter Russian efforts to project power in the Western Hemisphere, the Arctic, and the Middle East. The significance of Russia's recent military activity in Syria cannot be downplayed. It is no less noteworthy as the power played in the invasion of Ukraine was. He is using military power to prop up Bashar al-Assad, a vicious dictator who is intentionally slaughtering the Syrian people and helping prolong ISIS terror in an attempt to retain power. And let's be clear about something. No matter what Putin says, he is not involved in Syria out of altruistic desire to defeat ISIS. The first airstrikes that Russia conducted were in the area where ISIS is not present. They are targeting other moderate opponents of the Assad regime. Putin is involved for the purpose of keeping Assad, or someone like Assad, in power, keeping Syria as a client state for Russia, and distracting from his actions in Ukraine. He also views this as an opportunity to stick a finger in the eye of the United States, something that will not be tolerated if I am president. After generations spent ensuring that Russia had limited sway in the Middle East, President Obama's weakness has now opened the door to restoring Russia as a Middle Eastern power. Russia hopes to have a permanent air base of significant magnitude in Syria, which will allow them to project power regionally and in direct competition with our interests. President Obama has created the view that America looks weak, which is a very dangerous perception, and one that Vladimir Putin is nurturing. By word and by deed, he is trying to convince U.S. partners that America is a losing bet, that Russia is the only country willing to take decisive action to confront the threats the region faces. The reality is no good can come out of Russia's involvement in Syria. Anyone saying Russia can join the U.S.-led coalition against ISIS or take on ISIS on our behalf, anyone saying that is either extremely naive or looking for a way out of a fight they don't see America winning. As president, I will make clear that there will be no U.S.-Russian cooperation in the fight against ISIS until Russia brokers the departure of Bashar al-Assad from power. I will reassure U.S. allies and partners in the region that the United States, not Russia, is the most trustworthy and capable ally in this fight. This will involve the deployment of U.S. Special Forces and other military personnel to increase the frequency and accuracy of our airstrikes, as well as the additional intelligence sharing with our partners. I will also act to reassure U.S. allies and partners in Eastern Europe who feel increasingly threatened by Putin and increasingly abandoned by President Obama. I believe the United States should reaffirm our goal of a Europe that is whole, free, and at peace. As Commander-in-Chief, I will build upon and expand the decisions made by NATO at the Wales Summit by deploying additional military assets and personnel to NATO allies, especially Poland and the Baltic states, and by providing additional training and assistance to frontline states such as Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova. I will halt all U.S. military withdrawals from Europe and review our force posture to fit the new security environment that now exists. I will speed up deployment of missile defense systems to our allies that should never have been bargained away in the first place. Additionally, my administration will work to ensure NATO remains open to membership for all interested partners in Europe who meet the requirements, and that includes Georgia and eventually Ukraine, should they choose to do so. Russia should not have veto power over which states join the alliance. We also need a president who recognizes that America's newly reachable energy resources carry great potential as a tool of soft power. Opening up oil and natural gas exports to our allies in Europe will break the chains of their reliance on Putin's Russia and the blackmail that so often comes along with it. Even as we confront Russia and Europe and the Middle East, we need to increase our support to the Russian people. It is important to note that our concerns with Russia are not with them, for it is they who suffer most from Putin's lies, his thievery, his repression. Unlike this president, I will speak frankly about who Vladimir Putin is and what his regime represents. I will increase our efforts to counter Russian propaganda so that the Russian people have access to accurate information. And I will use all the tools at my disposal to sanction those Russian officials involved in human rights abuses, including those who target members of the Russian opposition and kill true Russian patriots like Boris Nemtsov. As the Obama and Clinton record has shown, the longer we wait to stand strong against Putin's Russia, the higher the price of inaction will be. With that said, let me be clear about one thing in closing. Putin's Russia is not the greatest challenge we will face in our lifetimes. And Putin himself has ensured that this is the case. He has sowed the seeds of his own destruction by crippling the Russian economy and by stealing the potential of what could be a great nation and a tremendous partner for the people of the United States. History is simply not on his side. Because Putin will always lack what we Americans have, the exact trait that makes us so special, and that will ensure we succeed in this century. And that is, in the words of President Reagan, the will and moral courage of free men and women. But to ensure Putin's ambitions remain unachieved, our will and our courage must be backed with strength. Strength of arms, strength of strategy, and most of all, strength of leadership. I intend to offer that strength in the years ahead. And I thank you for being here today and for continuing our discussion. Thank you very much.